Hello, and welcome to the Channel 16 election special. My name is Crystal Hebert, and today I'm here with Mr. Eliot Cutler. He's running for governor, and he's also the independent candidate. Today he's going to tell us a little bit about his campaign and about himself, so welcome to the studio.
Nice to be here, Crystal. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, like your background, education, things like that?
Well, I grew up in Bangor, and I went to Harvard College and then went to work for Senator Muskie, who was the senator from Maine who wrote the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and was really one of the great Maine legislators of all time, was Secretary of State, ran for president. And so I worked for him for about 7 years, and then I was Associate Director of the Office of Management and Budget in the White House under President Carter. And I supervised all of the federal agencies in natural resources and energy and science areas, Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture, and so forth. And then I was a lawyer for a while. I started a lot of businesses. I've started and run 8 businesses in my life. They've all, knock wood, been successful. And my wife and I moved back to Maine finally in 1999 when she became a doctor, and I merged my law firm into a bigger one on the condition that I could commute, that I could live in Portland and go wherever I had to go. And one of the things they asked me to do was go live in China for 3 years. So we went to China and opened an office for this law firm in China. Came back here and I ran for governor in 2009 and almost won, lost by 9,000 votes to Governor LePage. And so I'm running again, and I've been an independent for, gosh, a long, long time. Used to be a Democrat, was a Republican for a little short time, but I'm an independent now, and I'm running for governor as an independent.
What made you change your
My affiliation,
Yeah.
my party? You know, when I was working for Senator Muskie, the Republican and the Democratic parties were sort of like this. There were conservative Democrats and liberal Democrats, and there were conservative Republicans and liberal Republicans. And over time, the parties sort of moved away from the center, and now they're way over here and way over here. And I am a fiscal conservative. I'm a budget guy. I mean, I'm very careful with money. But I'm a social moderate. I'm sort of a live and let live guy. I don't try to get in people's lives. And I think government is the one mechanism that we've ever found in the United States that where we can work together, but we're not working together now. And I think that's because we no longer have anybody in the middle. I'm tired of all the bickering. I'm tired of the fighting. I'm tired of the special interests that pour huge amounts of money into places like Maine to try to tell us what to do. I want to be obligated only to the people of the state of Maine, not to any outside special interests, and that's why I'm an independent.
Well, that's good.
It is good.
Yep.
It makes me feel good.
Yeah, definitely. You always want to do what you want to do.
Well, I want to make you know what it is, Chris? It's a question of making judgments. It's a question of when you have these big issues in front of you that are important to the state of Maine and the people who live here, the last thing in the world that voters should want is a governor who's going to be listening to people outside the state of Maine telling us what to do, because those people who are pouring millions of dollars into the Democratic and Republican parties, they don't really care about us in Maine. They don't care about our future. They just want a governor that either has a D or an R after his name.
Right, yeah. What made you interested in politics?
You know, when I was growing up in Bangor, my parents, my father was from Old Town, my mother was from Bangor. All four of their parents had been immigrants. And Maine provided for my parents enormous opportunities that they couldn't have had anywhere else. And for me. And I learned a long time ago about a president named Teddy Roosevelt, not Franklin Roosevelt, but Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt believed in something called the square deal. His whole philosophy was based on the idea that every man, woman, and child who lived in the United States should have what he called a substantial equality of opportunity. He didn't believe that anyone should be guaranteed anything, but that everyone should have a shot, a fair chance.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that. I had those opportunities when I was growing up, and I want every child in Maine to have an opportunity. And I became interested in politics as a way to do that. I was a lousy basketball player. I was a lousy baseball player, but I discovered that there were other things I could do with my life and do well. So that's how I got there.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. What are some important issues that you bring if you became governor?
Maine's biggest challenge, I think, is keeping kids like you in Maine. And the key to that is to provide an opportunity for every child in Maine to graduate from high school and then to go on to get some kind of training, special skills training, or college, university education. Because the jobs of the future, jobs now and in the future, are going to be jobs that are going to require education. And if you and your peers, kids your age, don't have education beyond high school, it's going to be harder and harder for you to find a job. And so in order to make Maine healthier, and stronger, and younger, and more prosperous, we've got to provide an educated workforce to employers who are here now and want to grow their businesses, and to employers who want to come here. That's the first job. And second, we've got to invest again in Maine's infrastructure, communications, transportation. We ought to have a vast agricultural sector in Maine, much bigger than we have today. Used to be 10 times bigger than it is today. But we've let it go, and we haven't invested in the kinds of infrastructure that we need to maintain it. We don't have a plan about how to grow and be prosperous in Maine. We haven't had a plan forever. Every success I've ever had has depended on having a plan, and I think we need to have that in Maine.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. I know some local farmers here who have lost their farms because they weren't making enough money, and
right.
So some of my friends lost their harvest jobs and things like that. So that's definitely
and it ripples through the whole economy.
Yeah, exactly. So then it affects our town. It affects our families. So that's a good plan.
And the other real challenge in towns like Madawaska. I mean, I was at the Fraser Mill gate this morning, shaking hands at 5:00, and I was with a fellow named Bert LaChance who used to work at the mill. And Bert said, it used to be that there were 1,200 people working here. Now there are 400, but we're producing twice as much paper as we used to produce. Now, this has been going on for years and years and years. As machines and computers and technology gets more productive, there's less and less demand for labor, for workers. Mm-hmm. Well, if we want to keep Madawaska alive and well, and I do, we've got to bring in other companies, other jobs. We've got to rebuild the agricultural sector in the valley and in northern Maine. We have more water than we know what to do with. We have all this fabulous land. Maine is like a huge rocket that's ready to take off if we just get it right. But we got to have a plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know you kind of answered my question a little bit, but you know that we're a paper mill town. And Verso Paper recently closed their mill in Bucksport, and a lot of people lost their jobs, about 500. What's your opinion on that and the paper making industry in general dealing with the economy?
Maine is going through a very difficult transition right now. And it's a transition that started before you were born, but is reaching a crescendo now. It started before you were born when we lost our shoe factories and lost our textile mills. And you've seen mill towns all over Maine that used to be really vibrant communities that were built around a mill, and then the jobs left. But we always had paper. But now we're beginning to lose the paper jobs because the demand around the world for the paper, particularly newsprint and catalog paper, glossy paper, demand is falling 5, 6, 7% a year. And that means that we've got to begin thinking about what do we do next. Too many of our elected leaders, too many politicians, have their focus on the rearview mirror. They want to bring back the old days. Well, it's not going to happen. We're not going to succeed that way. We've got to focus on the next generation, on your generation, and we've got to begin investing for you. In Bucksport, as an example, the great asset in Bucksport is not necessarily the mill. It's the energy generation facility there. Because if the state took over that energy generation facility, we could sell electricity for 4 cents a kilowatt hour to new manufacturing companies that would come to Bucksport. I was in Bucksport just about 4 days ago, and the potential there is dramatic if we do it right. We've got to begin thinking right now about what else can we bring to Madawaska that is going to provide jobs and incomes for people in Madawaska. What are the really essential assets? How do we rebuild the communications infrastructure so that we have broadband everywhere in Maine, fast broadband, and cellular service that's U.S. cellular service and that people can use? And how do we build the tourist industry in Aroostook? Because the tourist industry is the biggest industry in Maine, but we don't promote Aroostook the way we should. We don't promote Four Seasons sports the way we should. I mean, there's a fabulous ski industry here that we should be promoting everywhere in America. The snowmobile industry. I mean, we have great assets that are competitive advantages, but we need to focus on them and build them. And it all comes back to having a plan.
Do you think that the paper-making industry is great for our economy, or?
It's great for our economy. It has been great for our economy, but when you have the decline in demand for paper around the world, the handwriting's on the wall, and we need to focus on alternatives. If you're producing twice as much paper as you produced before with a third the number of workers, and that relationship is not going to be reversed, it's going to keep going in that direction, while at the same time the demand for paper around the world is falling, we've got to begin thinking of other possibilities. We've got to begin thinking of the 21st century. And that's why education is so important to me, because you know, and I know, that the jobs that are coming down the pike in your century are going to require education.
So that leads actually into our next question. What are your thoughts on education, like public schools and college, and how do you think that if you became governor, how do you think you could help students with tuition and how expensive college is?
You know, our biggest challenge in Maine is figuring out how to get more of our high school graduates to go on to skills training, to college, university. And we graduate about 85% of our high school seniors. Our graduation rate is pretty high for the country. We're about 10th or 12th. Not great, but it's solid.
Yeah.
But we're 34th in the country in the number of our graduating high school seniors who then go on to any kind of post-high school training or education. That's not good. And you ask why are we not doing better? The answer is money. It is too expensive. When you graduate from high school and you want to go on to college or university, and someone says this is what you should do, and you say, well, how much is it going to cost? And it's, $60,000, $80,000 for say 4 years. And you say, well, my family doesn't have that kind of money. And then they say, well, you can borrow it. Well, for an 18-year-old to look at taking on a debt like that, it's pretty forbidding, right?
Yeah.
So what's the alternative? Well, I was looking around when I was writing my book, which is called The State of Opportunity, and it's available on our website. You can download it for free. When I was looking around the world for how other places have figured out how to do it, Australia has a program called Pay It Forward, Pay It Back. It has increased by 50% the number of Australian high school students who go on to post-high school training and education. It's helped raise the whole economy in Australia. And several states in the U.S. are now looking at it, and I think we should look at it, and so I propose that we do it. And the legislature last year began a study of Pay It Forward, Pay It Back. Now, what is this? It's a program that eliminates tuition for graduating high school seniors in Maine for any Maine institution of higher learning or skill training. The state of Maine borrows money, sets up a fund that pays the tuition. If you benefit from that fund, if you graduate from Madawaska High School and you decide, say, to go to the University of Maine, no tuition at all. Not a discount, not 1 year free, no tuition at all. You're then obligated for the first 20 years of your working life after college, till you're 40-something, to pay back 3% of your income every year. Whether you make a little or a lot, it's 3% into the fund, so that the fund can then invest in the next generation. This way, we begin to develop over the course of time more and more educated young people who can stay in Maine and take the jobs that we know will be available. We've got to knock that barrier down that's keeping kids from going on, and that's the way to do it.
Well, that's a really good plan.
I think it is.
Yeah, that's actually really smart. That's a good idea. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? The one thing I'd like to say about Maine, and I'll say it to you and I'll say it to your audience, is this. Those of you who are old enough to remember, as I do, we get up in the morning and we go to watch a rocket being launched to the moon. These were the days when Walter Cronkite would go to Cape Canaveral. He'd be down there for this big launch of a rocket, and you knew that there were 3 or so astronauts sitting in the nose cone in the capsule, in the space capsule. And you'd be watching on television, and the gantry would pull away from the rocket, and the rocket would be standing there on the launch pad. Steam would be coming out of the engines. I mean, it was ready to go, and you just knew that if you pressed the right buttons in the right order, that rocket would rise off the launching pad, lift off, and go to outer space. Enormous energy, an enormous potential energy. That's what Maine is today. Maine is like a rocket ready to take off. And I don't think that if we depend on Republicans and depend on Democrats who are fighting with each other to do it, that rocket's not going to take off. We've got to move away from politics as usual. We've got to do something different. We've got to do something different for your generation. And I ask for your votes to help me do it. I won't be obligated to anybody but the voters of Maine. So well, thank you. Thanks for this opportunity, Thank
Crystal.
you. Channel 16 thanks you for coming in and taking the time for an interview. This is Crystal Hebert signing out.